Today, my guest is Anthony, and we had a little bit of a different kind of discussion than the normal ones I have because we talked about exploitation and toxic behaviors at a systems and society level. And he goes over how the system encourages people to exploit people because it actually rewards that behavior. And to me, this is a fascinating topic because whether you deal with narcissistic people or not individually, you still have to deal with the system as a whole. And that's what we examined together. And to me, I thought it was a fascinating discussion, and I hope you think so as well. Anthony, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well, Jared. Thank you. How are you?
I'm living the dream over here. One thing I am really curious about with you is what is your purpose and goal of talking about the kinds of things you talk about?
So, my purpose and goal is to ultimately empower people to more clearly identify the systems they're in, to see more clearly how everything kind of interacts and relates to each other, to gain more self awareness so they can make better decisions about how to move within these systems we're within, because there are very real systems with real constraints, but we do still have agency and power in them. And it can be hard to see how all the pieces work together and how they all interact. And so my goal is to really bring that awareness and help people wake up so that they can kind of experience more of themselves, more of life. And hopefully that will eventually lead to a world where there's a lot more contentment and true connection and meaning and purpose.
And I think what I really find interesting about what you talk about is how you incorporate the systems and then their motives into what happens to all of us. And a big one I see you talk about is the formula of exploitation. Could you go over what that is?
Yeah, so the formula of exploitation basically, I mean, so you start with a zero sum framework, right? So I mean, it starts with a scarcity mindset. Like there's only so much to go around. You know, the opposite would be collaboration, which suggests that we can create more value together than we could on our own. But exploitation, essentially, I view it that it takes advantage of our empathy and our social instincts because we are a social creature, you know, a social animal. Like we've evolved to be social. It's been successful for our species, and we're designed to have empathy, to seek connection with each other, to collaborate. But the systems basically prey on that. They rely on that empathy. They rely on people caring about each other. And there are those who don't have that same empathy or don't have that same care or only have it for a specific group. And so they take advantage of that and use it to basically make people tolerate things they wouldn't normally tolerate or to invalidate someone's concerns. I think one of the examples I used is like sharing with a friend or somebody like, hey, what you just said hurt me. And them being like, oh, you hurt me, you know, right back at you. Like, and if you're empathetic, like, and self-reflect, you're probably gonna be like, oh no, did I say something wrong? Like, and you get this real, you know, and all of a sudden you're giving them your energy and attention when really they should be doing the opposite. But they rely on that. And there are people who know how to work that and really use it to their advantage to continue to extract and mine by playing on this idea that we have that natural social instinct. And for people like me who did not realize that there were people like that, you know, I never understood that there were people who did not feel the need to reciprocate, who did not have empathy, you know, who did. So it never made sense to me. I couldn't even conceptualize that they may just be playing me, you know, to get this from me. And so part of it is waking people up to that is happening and that it's not that our empathy is a weakness. It's that it's a strength and they're using it though. They're making it seem as if it were a weakness.
What are some examples of that? How empathy gets exploited as a weakness?
So I think one of the biggest ones I've personally experienced and seen is with parents. You know, parents, with their children, they feel strongly for their children. They have a lot of empathy for their children. They want to care for their children, provide for them. And as a result, they're generally put in positions where they will tolerate far worse work conditions. They don't have the ability to like just get up and leave. You know, they have to worry about
Mm.
uprooting their children, how that's going to affect their lives. They have to worry about providing for them. So if they're in like a negative situation at work, they don't have a whole lot of leverage. And so I think a lot of parents get stuck in jobs that aren't healthy or good for them or whatever because they have empathy for their children. They want to care for their children. And the companies take advantage of that because they know that they can't afford to leave the job.
And that creates what you call the exploitation dominoes. The cycle just repeats and gets worse.
Yep, because once you're in one of those situations where you basically lose choices, you lose some of your agency because you're trying to meet the needs of the people you care about and whatever, then that exposes you to be even more vulnerable to, like, let's say, if you did try to leave the job, then where are you going to get money from? You know, that might open you up to someone else presenting like a get rich quick scheme that you're not as you're just in survival mode trying to survive and get by, and you get taken advantage of there, and then now you're even worse situation and more desperate, plus you're already more tired, you're already more stressed, you're and you know, maybe then you have to move in with family who are like not the best for you, not the best influence and are controlling. But once again, like, what options do you have? Like, you got to provide shelter for yourself and your kids. Like, you know, you care about them more than so it just continues. Like, you can just keep getting yourself into deeper and deeper situations, all because that empathy, that care, that trying to provide and do what's right.
Right. And I think a lot of the people that follow me, they'll be able to relate to that story when they are reliant on abusive or toxic family members, but then they're in a bad spot. So they think, well, I got to try to get out of here. But then that makes them a little more vulnerable, which then also makes them more vulnerable to other predators on the outside because they're trying to get out of that dysfunctional family or abusive family system. And that cycle can just go round and round.
Yep, exactly. Exactly, and it's really sad to see. And I mean, the people who are caught in that, like, you don't hear about it as much because they're caught in the cycle. When you're caught in that, you're just trying to survive every day. You're just trying to get by. There's not time to go out and necessarily like proclaim to the world what's happening. And a lot of times, in my experience, has been even when I try to share, if I'm going through a situation like that, people shut it down. Like, people don't want to hear about it. They don't they either it's too threatening to their worldview to think that people could be put in such exploitative situations. So the few people that do speak out, it's basically they're being told, you know, here's how you swim better while you're drowning. Like, nobody's reaching out a hand and being like, let me help you out. Like, yeah.
What do they say to you about it? What is their pushback?
Their pushback typically comes back as blame. So victim blaming, like, well, your choice, you got yourself in this, right? Or not my problem, or just there's also a lot of shame. They try to shame, like, well, this is what a real man does, or this is what a real parent does, or this is what, you know, and they basically avoid the entire message or the entire like, here's the situation, here's what I've tried, here's what's not working, here's where I need help, which is that's being accountable, that's like being honest, that's trying to do the right thing. It's like, I'm not pretending I'm doing better than I am. I'm risking like social rejection. I'm risking like being seen as less than. I'm putting myself out there, and they ignore all that and just come back and be like, yeah, you're just it's all your fault, you know.
Right, right. And some of that are the people that enable the exploitation to continue. The this is what a real man will do, or you have to do what you got to do, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And again, it's difficult because sometimes there's some truth in it, but also it's a blanket generalization as well that does absolutely enable problematic systems to continue.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times it's because either people themselves are caught in similar situations and don't want to acknowledge it and look at it because of how disempowering it can feel. And that might mean making some difficult choices that they're avoiding and don't want to look at themselves. Because whenever we bring up something and it triggers something in someone else, there's something in us that's resonating with that, right? Or the other piece of it is a lot of times people don't want to acknowledge their complicity in it, because
Mm,
if they truly acknowledged and accepted what people are saying, you'd have to acknowledge, like, wow, I am taking advantage of this system that is exploiting others. Like, I am benefiting from this system that, like, grossly misdistributes wealth. Like, I am getting paid like significantly more than the other workers who are barely supporting their family. And maybe that's not fair or right. you know,
mm.
they don't want to look at that.
Right. I mean, especially in America, working hard is certainly not what it takes to become wealthy. Like you could work hard in something that just is in the wrong area and you'll
Mhm.
spin your wheels for life. So working hard is only an element of it if you're working hard in the right things. You got to be working hard in specific things, then you get rewarded. But you could argue someone who has to wash dishes all day, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, they're working harder than people that make 50 times more than them. They're just doing it in the wrong area. But I mean, and this is an indictment on the entire system, which brings me to the next question. How do you see the exploitative people get rewarded in our system?
So I see it from, I mean, I started seeing it when I was a kid. Like, even the social structure of like being, in first, second grade, like the quote unquote bad kids, right? The ones who broke the rules, who cheated on tests, who whatever, like they were cool, right? Everyone thought they were cool. Like, at least in my school, most of the times it was like the rebellious kids who broke the rules, who got the social validation, right? And so, like, it starts there, and it even starts in the classroom. Teachers like will say like, oh, don't cheat, do your homework, do whatever. But like, and then you get that cool kid that they also cater to, and they also like make feel special. I saw a lot of the time, and that just continues and gets more complex in adulthood, basically, because it comes down to like, it's all about appearance, right? Like, even then, like, it was about appearance. Like, if I could appear like I knew the information, even though I cheated on the test, I would still get a really good grade and look like I'm smart. And that's the truth in adulthood. It's all about appearing. So they get rewarded because they're willing to make decisions that others aren't. Like, yes, some people, they have talent, they have vision, they have ability, but also those who become the most successful are the ones willing to like cut pay, are the ones willing to make sacrifices to the environment, are the ones willing to undercut different employees. Or I saw it all the time in business, where like if a mistake was made, like higher ups would always blame someone. Even if it was their mistake, they would find someone to
Hmm.
scapegoat, right? And then of course they get the credit, and they get the and so basically they get rewarded by knowing that most people expect each other to be honest, to be caring, to be considerate, right? That's what we expect as social creatures. And then they do the opposite, and they take advantage of that. And then the system, instead of intervening, it rewards that. It's just like, because they're not interested in human well-being or growth, they're interested in profit, you know. And so that just, they'll reward whatever is going to bring them more profit. And caring less about people, caring less about the environment, generally brings more profit in our
Right.
system.
And I think, like you said, the people who have empathy and compassion, they're the ones that get exploited. And the people that can mimic those things, they're the ones that get rewarded the most, whether they are truly compassionate, authentic, or whatever, they'll still get the rewards of it. And that kind of reminds me of what the founding fathers said. And I think even Nixon said, he said, capitalism without morals is not going to work for long. And I think we are seeing that right now. We are seeing when there is no principles and there is no character. And that's also what you're saying, really. You're saying people don't have the character that they used to. They don't have the integrity. And when they don't have the character or integrity, they put profits over everything at the expense of whatever it takes. And I think we're seeing the results of that now.
I agree. Yep. And it's I don't think anyone's actually benefiting from it. I mean, even those who are actually benefiting with the material, like I mean, I haven't heard many stories about like very wealthy people being super happy or feeling fulfilled. Like, and most research I've seen suggests like wealth after a certain point really doesn't make a difference. In fact, in some studies, it correlates with like being even more depressed, being even more dissatisfied, right? So like our system's operating like against logic as well. Like that's the other thing is like research consistently shows the most determining factors of contentment in life are the quality of relationships you have with people, meaningful, like feeling purpose driven and meaningful. Those are some of the things that bring the best results. And but our system ha- does has nothing to do with that. It's all about money, like, or earning. That's it. And like it just isn't working for anyone, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say there are probably some wealthy people who are a little more fulfilled than others, but I did see that Harvard study, I think that you're referring to, that they studied people's lives and their whole lives. And so they're like from a young kid into their 90s. And they said the quality of their relationships was the biggest determining factor of how happy they were and how satisfied they were with their lives, which makes perfect sense to me. And
Mhm.
I think, but what do you do to get people to stop putting profit over everything? What are the ways to actually encourage integrity, to encourage character, to encourage people doing the right thing? I think religion used to be that for some people, but again, that can be weaponized as well. But what do you think people should be doing? What do we do as a society to try to improve the situation?
Well, I think it's recognizing what, like really taking the time to pause and look at what's happening. Like not just what we're being told, not what's being broadcast, not like what people are saying in social media, like just pausing and looking at like, here's what people are saying, here's what's actually happening, or this is how I actually feel about this, because we're so overwhelmed and inundated with so much different information, so many different products, so much distractions. Like we don't take the time to just reflect and think about what's actually happening. How do I actually feel? What do I actually think here? We've become so disconnected. So a lot of it is trying to create moments where we reflect, and also developing the language to talk about it like effectively, like to actually call things what they are. Not look at what people are saying. Like you can, if you my experience is when you look at like even advertisements or something, there's the ad, right? There's what they're saying on the ad, but there's also the actual meaning. Like there's a meaning that is below that, and if you really take the time to evaluate it and look at the deeper thing, you'll realize like, whoa, these are two completely different things. Like we say we value hard work, right? But do we compensate people for hard work? Do we demonstrate that value? No, that's not what we're paying people for. We're not paying people for hard work. You know what I mean? Like you can, like you said, you can work really hard and still not make significant money. So like we have to look at all those gaps and be able to name it and talk about it. And I think also the experience of actually experiencing real connection, like real community, which starts with getting more real about what we're seeing, what we're experiencing. I think that will naturally make people realize that's what they want. That's what they're craving. That's what they're chasing everywhere else.
And I think you have a quote that I think really describes this well too. You had said, awareness decreases their territory of deception. And
Hmm.
could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, because a lot of deception thrives on the idea that I guess they thrive on the idea that you're going to believe what they say. So for me, like I relate it to when I used to play basketball. Like they would say, keep your eyes on the ball, like not their hands, right? Because you can fake pass, you can dribble. Keep your eyes on the actual ball. Like people can say they're doing one thing and like put on a show and be doing something completely different. So the more you build awareness of what's actually happening, not just what's being said or just the facade that's being presented, the less they can deceive because you have a wider view of what's actually happening. And part of that expanding awareness is also getting more in tune with ourselves and our own feelings because feelings aren't like extra fluff just for fun or they're information. They're an information system that biologically evolved to help us survive. Like they provide crucial information that thought and mentalization alone cannot provide.
Interesting. What's an example of that?
An example of that would be for me, a lot of times I can pick up on when I experience people's words and actions not aligning or something being a little off about what they said. Like I will feel a tension in my body. I will feel like, oh, all of a sudden, like, and that's a signal to me, okay, pay more attention, you know. Um, but some people I know like are so out of tune with their bodies they might not even like realize how they haven't how thirsty they are. They haven't drank all day, yeah, right? And all of a sudden they're like getting headaches and whatever. But they're so out of tune with the way their actual body feels that they won't pick up on something like that, you know?
So it's the disconnection. And I think disconnection in general, there's pretty much an epidemic of that. There's people that maybe they never had connection with themselves to begin with, really. And maybe that started from a young age. And maybe they're trying to get back to that place where they can finally get to some peace and connection. But I think there's also a lot of things distracting us and preventing us from getting to that level of connection too.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's how the system works primarily is it disconnects us from ourselves. Like that's its goal because the l- less connected we are to ourselves, the more easily we are influenced. Um, because when you're connected to yourself, then you know what you think, you know what you feel, you know why you believe what you believe, etc. Like, and someone presents an idea to you, like it's pretty clear whether or not that idea feels good, makes sense to you, fits your framework. But if you're like, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I think, I don't know what I feel, I don't know what I believe, and people present you, and it's kind of like, oh, okay, that sounds good, that feels good, I'll do that, like,
Okay, I get you. Now, to kind of switch gears back to what we were talking about before, what is a wealth and power rehab?
wealth and power rehab. So, I don't think they exist, but I think they should, because for me, my understanding is addiction is anything that like people keep doing despite harmful consequences to themselves or others, like that they compulsively do. They cannot stop, right? And so that can be with behaviors, that can be with drugs, that can be with food. And I think like, when you look at like the extreme accumulation of wealth and power, like that is extremely excessive, like and it causes significant harm, like to other people, to the economy, to the planet. Like there's significant costs from this like ongoing pursuit of power and wealth. Like I would compare it to an addiction because if you really follow it to its very end, it results in like the destruction of the planet or species, right? That's where it would go if it's unchecked, and that's how it seems to be progressing. Therefore, like I would compare it to an addiction and think that maybe we need a rehab for these people who like pursue wealth and power at all costs to human life, human well-being.
Right. And I think the way you described it was they will attempt to get those short term gains in
Mhm.
terms of maybe quarterly profits, I think is what you said.
Yep.
And then at the expense of what? all of these other negative consequences to themselves, society, others, etc.
Yeah, I mean it's short-sighted. It's like, okay, we got to hit profit, we got to hit the numbers for this quarter, and that's as far as they look. But like there are plenty of companies and things that go under using that strategy because they're not sustainable. They're not looking at long-term production, long-term impact, long-term. It's all about got to hit the numbers right now, got to get that high right now, right? And they get increasingly desperate and use increasingly manipulative tactics. I mean, I just saw some videos about how they're like attempting to engineer food to bypass the Ozempic, that drug, to make people eat more. Like they're trying to engineer food that bypasses it because people aren't eating as much.
Mm.
They're literally like that. That's pretty terrible. Like there's a reason people are on that. You shouldn't bypass the mechanism.
So they're trying to make food that would bypass the mechanism that Ozempic blocks. I guess Ozempic, for those who don't know, is the drug that people take to lose their appetite and to lose weight, is
Yep.
basically what it's advertised as.
Yeah, pretty much. Yep. And so they're trying, but obviously that means less food sales and less profit. So that's a problem for them. So they're trying to
Right.
figure out ways because it's more about profit than human well-being, right?
Well, grotesque. I'd say it's grotesque if you try to get a food of that many people are taking Ozempic that they're going to try to make food that bypasses the mechanism of action of Ozempic. That's wild. But not surprising though. No, I shouldn't say. Not surprising that that happens either. But here's the other thing about this whole thing too. I don't know if you're familiar with AA or NA and their models of the disease of addiction and the disease of alcoholism, but and people could say they're one and the same thing. But if you believe in that model, they would say that disease can transfer to anything. So it could easily transfer to wealth, power, money, etc. It's just a manifestation of the same core issue. And
Mhm.
the people in AA and NA, that core issue comes out with drinking or drug use. But you could argue it's that very same thing that is pushing the people to strive for never ending wealth and power. Because there's a difference. With money, for example, it's not like a drug where you can say one's too many, a thousand's never enough. No, we have to have a working relationship with money, just like we have to have a working relationship with food. You can't just say, okay, I have a food addiction, I just can't eat. No, you got to find a way to integrate somehow. And I think, yeah, not all pursuit of money is a bad pursuit. We all need to live and survive. But there comes a line somewhere. And I think that when you say addiction, that's where the line would be, right? If you're causing all this harm to yourself. But also, as I'm thinking, part of that issue is even if it's not an addiction, the pursuit can still be harmful depending on where you are, right? Because that's the nature of a predatory system anyway, where you could be harming yourself and doing these things just to survive. And then that's because of the system, though. And I guess you would say connection is the answer to that, to become aware of it first, to reduce the area of deception, and
Mhm.
then spread awareness, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it said that the opposite of addiction is connection, and I believe that to be true in my own experience, and even in some that famous study like Rat Park, where they had a bunch of rats, where they basically like they gave them a socially enriched environment, and then one of the waters was laced with I think cocaine or something, and then they gave them one where they were isolated, and the ones in the isolated environment would push the lever until they died from overdose, whereas the
Wow.
ones in the socially enriched environment, they would they wouldn't take it, or they'd try it and they'd stop, or those that were already addicted would wean themselves off of it. Like addiction is definitely a manifestation of a social issue, which is why it continues to grow, the rates of it. It's a and I do think the solution is connection, but especially connection with ourselves, with our own perceptions, with our own awareness, with our own ability to see clearly, to experience ourselves as we are, because that's really The only place then you can reach out to connect with another person is from within yourself.
Right. And besides the awareness part, what are some other steps that the average person can do to stop rewarding exploitation and to stop rewarding predatory behavior? Is there anything they can do?
I think a big part of it is one, being able to name it, so recognize it when it's happening, right? So educating yourself, gaining more awareness about how these systems work and operate, and how they use our own psychology and biology against us. So with that awareness, then we can also start naming it. We can start naming it when we see it, particularly with people we feel safe enough with. Obviously, you don't want to like necessarily put ourselves in harm's way, but we do want to try and call it out and bring awareness to it where we can. And because eventually it's one of those things like, I mean, they fight so hard to suppress it because they know if enough people were aware of this, they would lose power. They would lose their advantage because it depends on us being confused and blind to what's actually happening. You know, um, so the more that we can spread that awareness and connect with others on it, and also develop alternative systems that reward true value, like that, where we even um, with friends, coworkers, our children, whatever, like not necessarily going off the current model, but like really developing what is actually valuable, what is worthwhile, and making sure that we reward that, that we speak up about that, that we support that.
How do you define true value?
I define true value as something that increases like mutually. So it creates win-wins for everyone involved. It supports both parties in mutual growth or mutual benefit. That would be something I'd consider truly valuable, um, which doesn't always, and that's where it gets tricky because I look at things like technology, right, where people would say certain technology has brought us value. And it has, and it hasn't. Like even the phones we can look at, we can say, yes, they have brought us certain values, but they also, like, there's phone addiction now. There's massive loneliness. There's all types of problems created as a result of these devices. So, like, it, is that it could be valuable, but how it's being used right now isn't necessarily valuable. So it's really looking at what is it actually creating? What is the actual impact of what we're bringing?
Right. And I think some of it is it won't be black and white completely when it
Hmm.
comes to a tool. A tool such as social media or a phone can be used for good or not so good. It
Hmm.
won't be across the board one way or the other. So that part will all depend as well.
Hmm.
And in terms of our system right now, I know people say in capitalism, there might not be any ethical consumption in capitalism. But what kind of system do you see that we have right now? And do you agree with that statement?
I don't know if I agree with that statement completely. I think it's a little more nuanced than that, but I don't see our current system as operating as true capitalism. I see it as undermining the very foundation of capitalism, which was competition to like fuel innovation, growth. Um, but what we have right now is crushing innovation and growth. It's not based on bringing value. It's just money that makes more money on itself for the most part, right? And then like pushes out anyone else who tries to bring something of value. So I don't think that what we're in right now is anything close to what capitalism was truly intended to be.
Right? A crony capitalism, basically, is
Yeah.
what we have. And then there's an element of corruption in it as well, with government officials and sometimes even the courts involved as well, where they enable it. They enable it to continue. And I think like the interesting part about what you talk about is it mimics the things that I talk about on an individual level. I
Hmm.
talk about narcissism, toxic behaviors, and what you're talking about is those things, those toxic behaviors, predatory, exploitative behaviors, except on a system level, in terms of this is what's happening in these systems, this is how these systems are exploitative, and it does mirror what happens on the individual level as well. And I think the very first post that you made, I think that caught my attention was, we are breeding exploitative people, because when you reward that, you reward the people who are going to be the most ruthless and cutthroat. How can we ever be surprised when we get more and more of those kinds of people when it's rewarded financially? And then often it's also rewarded romantically as well, for that matter, because you look at this, not to be sexist, but you think about any woman, almost every woman I know has had a story with a narcissist. So it is happening. They're getting rewarded somehow, but they might not see it as being rewarded, right? They might see it as they were deceived or they were tricked. But the end result is those kinds of dudes are the ones that are being rewarded financially and romantically. And that's not to blame women, but it's just to say, okay, this is something that's happening.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important to recognize, like, that's where I think people have a hard time hearing some of the things I bring, because it points out our own complicity in creating this. That, like, yes, there is a system that we're fighting against that's already established, and there are people in power who are very interested in continuing that system, but we all contribute to it by, like, what we decide to give our time, our attention to, our own, what we decide to assign as worthy and valuable. And the truth is, we continue to allow rewards to go to those who are most ruthless, typically those willing to lie, those willing to make the quote unquote hard decisions, which generally means human or environmental cost, right? Um, and that just furthers the system. And I mean, even now, I think about how, like, I've seen lots of posts also on, like, only the top 20% should have children, right? Or only
Hmm.
those that are this intelligent or this wealthy, right? Like, but typically when it comes to the wealth, like, okay, that means the most ruthless, because the people who accumulate the most wealth in the system by the nature of the system will be the most ruthless, the least empathic, the least considerate. Like, if we're also saying, yeah, they're the only ones who should reproduce, what are we going to end up with more of?
Right. I mean, and as a man, okay, I think a lot of what drives men's behavior in these realms is, one, the addiction to wealth and power, but also because the more wealthy and the more status guys have, usually the more romantic options they're going to have too. That usually goes hand in hand. I can think of very few times when that's not the case. More access to sexuality and relationships. So that's just another aspect of how it like continues to compound. And as a guy, I think being aware of that is key. And perhaps as a woman, being aware of that is key too. It's like, okay, just because this guy is wealthy doesn't mean that he's a good person, doesn't mean he's going to be a good partner to connect with. In fact, it might even mean he is less likely to be able to connect authentically because he had to be so disconnected to get to where he is.
Exactly, exactly. And the more we can become aware that, like, what we're actually attributing worth or value or success to, the more we can make better decisions for ourselves as well. Because if we're defining a successful man only by what he's producing or making or whatever, we're overlooking a lot of other things to consider. And that's for everyone. Like, and that's the problem I see happening in systems like this, is it really flattens people to just, like, caricatures, right? Kind of similar to narcissism. Like, it's just a bunch of other little people, that not incomplete people, that you're interacting with. It's just metrics, it's just numbers, it's just, but no, these are, like, everyone, these are whole people. Everyone is a whole person, like, with their own worldview, their own experiences, their own unique perspectives, and I think that so easily gets lost in a lot of these systems, and they're designed to do that. That's hence the polarization, hence the, like, purposefully trying to drive conflict and engagement through conflict. Like, I think we all see that, how conflict that fuels, like, rage and anger and conflict on social media, it generally gets more views, right? Like, and who knows if that's the system purposefully doing that, or if we are all just more interested in that, which I think there's probably both. It's probably a little bit of biology, a little bit of their architecture, but it just continues to like separate us from our wholeness and our connectedness.
Right. And I think a couple things there. One, I think there's the things that people say they want. And they say, okay, this is how we should be living. We should be having morals and principles. But then when you actually look at their choices and their actions, it tells a completely different story. And I think, for example, with some guys will say, this is what I want. I think this, I think that, I think this, or I'm a really Christian man, or what, fill in the blank. But then they're watching porn all day. Or then maybe they are screwing people over in some other way. Or a woman will say, I want the man who's going to be very emotionally intelligent and blah, 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 blah. And they have their grocery list. But then the guys they wind up with are completely different than that grocery list. And I see that a lot. I see that a lot in many areas. What people say versus what they actually do. And that's why trusting the actions over the words is pretty important. And that's how you get rid of some of the cognitive dissonance too. Okay, they say this, but their actions are a better indicator of what they really think and feel. Don't forget that. And then with the other side, with the algorithm and what gets promoted, conflict, uh, dislike or hatred of a third group gets a lot of engagement. What is that? Is that the algorithm? Is that us? Is that us contributing to it as a guilty pleasure? Oh, we're going to watch this. And they're getting rewarded a lot right now on YouTube. There's the people that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with these groups, but Podcast Cringe or Too Lazy to Try. Basically, what they do is they talk smack about comedians, basically, and they call them out. Or someone like CoffeeZilla or Spencer Cornelia. What they do is they call out grifters. And yeah, and there's a place for that. But it also turns into people love seeing other people get torn down and brought back to earth. Would you consider that a guilty pleasure? Or do you consider that, well, they're doing a just thing, exposing grifters? Now, for the comedians, that's a little more, I don't know what the benefit of that is really. I guess it's okay to call people out who are being disingenuous, I guess. The grifters, to me, that CoffeeZilla and Spencer Cornelia are calling out, they're more harmful. Like the grifters are more harmful, so I can see they're doing more of an authentic work. But my point is, they're all doing something that, okay, they love seeing people get bad talked. They love seeing people get torn down. And that's what's contributing to what the algorithm is pushing. And it's like in V for Vendetta. He says, if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look into the mirror. And that's true for a lot of things.
Yep, and I mean, it's meant to be an addictive cocktail in a lot of ways. I mean, when we feel that self-righteous anger, right? Like that cues our dopamine, that gets our endorphins going, that makes us feel really present and clear. And in a world where a lot of people are distracted a lot of time, don't know what they're doing with their lives, where they're going, that moment of like, oh, I feel clear, focused, and purposeful is really appealing. And it creates also, I'd argue, a feeling of false connection, right? Because, hey, we're all against this person. We're all united
Mm.
in this. So now I feel like I belong. So now I'm feeling focused. I'm feeling present. I'm feeling good. Like I feel better than that person. So now my ego's happy. I'm also feeling like I'm part of a group. Like it's great, And I think it's really like a twisted desire to feel belonging, connection, alive, like which would naturally happen if we were more present in ourselves and more aware and form true connection based on shared values, shared perception, shared like worth, not shared hatred or shared what we're against. It's kind of like trying to create that connection while avoiding true vulnerability, right?
That's a good way to put it, I think. And just asking those questions of ourselves, I think, would be important too. Why do I like this? What am I getting out of this? Is it just a Schadenfreude? Is it like you said, is am I tricking myself into feeling connection by hating on this other group with everyone else here, or these other people with everyone else here? Just important questions to ask, I think. Which also reminds me, you have a good checklist of how to tell a good faith comment on a post from a not so good faith comment. What is your checklist?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple questions. One of the easiest ones, most obvious ones, is whether or not the comment, the reply to you, does it actually address what you said? Does it in any way comment on what the idea you proposed? There's plenty of people who will just all launch into something that has nothing to do with the argument, whatever you said or shared, and that would be considered a bad faith comment. I would not engage with something like that. Then there are some that are meant to distract or take away. They may like pick apart. So let's say they take a part of your message, right? And they ask about it. So they meet okay, they address something in the message, but then you look at it and you're like, yeah, this was just kind of like description. This had nothing to do with the main point. And you realize what they're commenting on, like it doesn't contribute to the conversation. It's not asking a question. It's not showing curiosity. That would probably be a bad faith. So I think it's important to be, well, does it have to do with what you actually said? Is it about the idea that you talked about in its entirety, not just picking it apart? Does it approach with curiosity and respect? And does it show does it show genuine interest to understand, or is it just argumentative? Is it trying to, are they trying to tell you what you actually meant, what you actually said, what you actually think, how you actually feel, who you are as a person? Because those are all invalid. They don't lead to any type of productive conversation. Um, that's just, and I think that's a good way, like, to really, the moment someone starts telling you who you are, what you think, what you feel, what you believe, that's where you just got it. You've already, there's no connection there. They've already decided you're someone that you're not. So how do you connect with them if they can't see you?
Right. I have a term for that. WTF gaslighting is when someone tells you what you really want, think, or feel. Always pretty obnoxious when someone does that. And a lot of the comments that you get, they just come out with, they assume what you know, they assume what you meant, they assume, and they have this idea in their minds about what you said, and it might not always be accurate, their idea. Like, they think you must think this. They pull it to an exaggerated extreme, and then they address you as if you presented that exaggerated extreme. But it's like, no, well, how about you ask me what I mean? How about you
Yeah.
ask me what I really meant, or what do I think, as opposed to saying and they're instantly on the attack, and that's what happens a lot. They're instantly on the attack, and for me, if I get a whiff of that antagonism, hostility, or bad faith, there's just no use. There's no use in responding to them because they're not looking for a resolution. They're looking for more of a reaction or just to be told they're right. That's all that part is. Or you'll get the ad hominems, people
Mhm.
just addressing how you look or something about you, the person, that has nothing to do with what you said. Just, you see that a lot in the political comment sections. People will say nothing involving with the points or how someone's wrong, just some sort of ad hominem to disprove them, or an appeal to authority, or some sort of straw man argument that's not really legitimate of what that person really believes. And you see a lot of those logical fallacies.
Mhm. Yep, and that's another good thing that we can educate ourselves on is logical fallacies. I don't think many people don't understand what they are or what they look like in practice. I mean, they've been so normalized in my experience that people don't realize it. Like someone will bring up a point to counter another point that makes no sense. If you truly look at it, it does not fit in the conversation, but people will rally behind it and be like, "Oh
Right.
yeah, this." And but the problem is like it's fine, like if you want to express yourself, but also like let's, if we're trying to have actual dialogue, let's actually talk about what's being said and make sure we're understanding each other, like being curious about each other. If Because otherwise we're just looking to fight, we're just looking to have conflict, we're just looking to feel right, or to feel, what. And that's another one of those where, like, if people pause and ask themselves, wait, why am I replying to this, why am I saying this, like, what am I actually trying to express, we may be able to also, like, catch ourselves doing that, because there are times where I'll also, like, want to react and say something really snarky to someone that said something, and I'm like, why, what is that gonna do, what would that possibly do to make anything better, would that help this person, would it make them reflect more, or like, would it make, how would it make me feel, how would it, like, and then I give up on it, I'm like, yeah, there's no point, there's nothing of value I'm bringing to this. And that's a great question, like, what am I bringing, to the world, to other people, to my relationships, to interactions. Like, I see so many people talking about how they're not getting what they want or what they feel they deserve or this or that, but I see so few conversations talking about, and here's what I'm bringing to the world, and here's what I'm bringing to relationship, and here's what I know I have to give and offer, right?
You don't hear that very much. You're right. I try to say it's more important to be the right person than to find the right person. A lot of people just assume they already are the right person. I already am. Clearly I am. It's everyone else that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I see that with everyone. I see men say that. I see women say that. And the other thing you made me think of there too was, I think when people say something snarky, a lot of it is a virtue signal type thing. Sometimes you could maybe deceive yourself into thinking, well, bad things can happen when good people say nothing, so I have to say something here. But if you truly wanted to help, I think there's a way to say it. It's
Mm-hmm.
emotionally easy to be the snarky thing, and where you kind of just want to be, you want to let it out. Like, screw this person. I'm just going to let it out and rip. But that's really more self-serving
Mm-hmm.
and selfish to do it that way, as opposed to, if you really wanted to get a message across that's going to actually help people, how would you communicate that? How would you talk to this person? If you truly wanted to connect and come to a mutual solution or understanding, how you would do that is going to be completely different than if you just want a virtue signal and use that person as an emotional punching bag for having the wrong thinking, for having the wrong opinion in your mind. But that's the intellectually lazy thing to do. To do the just first thing that comes to my mind, I feel that jolt, I'm just going to lash out. And unfortunately, online, it's very conducive to letting people do that. It's right there, right? Every day you scroll on social media or X or Threads or wherever, you see all these opportunities for people to trigger you or to bother you in some way. And you have all these opportunities to lash out if you so choose. And I think what we see is there's a lot of people who choose to lash out, and because they have more opportunities to do so. Before, how would you even do this? How would you lash out about all of these topics before? Would you have to go to a town hall meeting? What would you do? Like, seriously, where would you go? Would you just fight with your family, I guess? Or your friends? Or go to the bar and rant and rave at the bar? But that's why they would say at the bar, no politics, no religion. Because that was the closest thing perhaps to social media back in the day, was the bar. You're drinking your social lubricant. So they say, you know what? We probably shouldn't let them talk about politics or religion at the bar. So we'll have that be an unwritten rule. But basically, social media is the bar. Social media is the bar now that everyone just comes to and speaks their mind. But there really isn't too many rules about it. There's not really too many ethical norms or values about how people communicate with one another. There's really only a couple things that are taboo, like people with like underage things. That's like really the only taboo thing I can really think of for the very most part. I mean, can you think of anything else that is where there's any kinds of tripwires? Other than that, they're just tripwires that certain groups have, but it's not for everyone. Like, the underage thing's really the only thing I can think of that pretty much everyone agrees on.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. I mean, I know that they have lists of what's considered like against their rules or community standards, but it's very rare that I see those honored or acknowledged beyond
Right.
the topic you brought up.
This is interesting. It's interesting. I think sometimes we can forget how new this technology really is, and we don't know how this is impacting people and their brains and their development. This, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 40 years old. I think my age and a little bit younger, we're still in a guinea pig generation here. We're in the guinea pig generation of what's social media going to do to people. And pretty soon we're going to add the AI component, and then that's going to snowball as well. I think we're not too far away from humans' life looking very, very different than it did even 30 years ago.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I'm 34, so yeah, probably one of the guinea pig generation, and and that's where also like stepping back and realizing like social media, I mean, it's an amazing technology. Like the potential for it is huge. Like the ability to share knowledge and experience really could truly be revolutionary, right? So it's once again like being really mindful and conscious of how are we using this? Are we using this as like a place to shame dump? Are we using this as a place to just get attention and stroke our egos? Are we using this as a place to build friendships, connections? Are we using this to exchange valuable information? Like, what are we using it for and why? And that goes back to like having that fundamental sense of like who we are, what we believe, what we value, and then actually acting in alignment with that. Because we've there's so much focus on image. Like this is who I appear is who I am. How I showcase myself is who I am. Like, and there's so little stress on like, and then be that person. Show us that by being that person. Like, don't keep telling us who you are. Don't keep like claiming who you are, demonstrate it. And it's like so many of us have forgotten the follow up piece of like, okay, does what they say play out? Like, does what I say translate into reality? And it's like there's this big gap between what's said, what appears to be, and what actually is.
Right. And that's why they say demonstrate, don't explicate. So
Mhm.
it's more important to demonstrate these things anyway. And you had also reminded me, I was talking to Dr. George Simon. He had written a book called Character Disturbance. And that's one of the big things he said is the difference with the present day. The character does not matter as much as it used to. Back in the 50s, 40s, 30s, 60s, even, character mattered where if you didn't live right, you were actually punished. There was more of a social mechanism of collective punishment back then. And I think a lot of it was used with collective guilt and shame. And
Mhm.
I think that's a big component of society now that isn't really there very much. There's not very many things where there's a collective guilt and shame anymore. And granted, there are some areas, right, where specific groups will have their version of it, maybe it's with race or LGBTQ or fill in the blank with something. But this is something also, I think the public guilt and shame, it gets tied to religion a lot, I think. And so people get reminded of, oh, that was a religious thing to do, and religions are all bad now, so screw that. And I think that's where people's heads go with it. But I don't necessarily think it was all bad. I think it's a good in between because not everything needs a law. You don't need a law for everything, I don't think. For some things, social stigma can be more effective than a law, I think. And I think that's something that our society is missing right now.
Yeah, I agree. There seems to be uh, not many values we all agree on, or at least there are values that we proclaim but selectively apply. That's another big one I've seen where um, it's where we claim open-mindedness, except for if you believe something that we don't believe, right? Or like we treat everyone equally unless you're this type of person, right? Like it's just like these things that contradict themselves. And it's for me, a lot of it is, once again, like getting in contact with like who we are as a whole, like each of us individually, because my experience is pretty much every human, like we can experience like the same feelings, the same thoughts, and given the same right circumstance, we probably can act in the same ways as each other. Like we're not immune from, and in fact, the more, that's the whole idea of having a shadow. Like the more we reject that we can be bad, that we can lie, that we can, have guilty pleasures, the more we're going to act that out of our control, out of our awareness, because it's just fundamentally parts of who we are that we've rejected. They don't disappear, they just disappear from our awareness, and then we like project them onto others or deal with them that way. But so much of this is that disconnect, and not knowing who we are and what we value and why, and not taking the time to actually take like an appraisal of ourselves and take a look at what we're creating, what we're bringing, what our actions are actually saying.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Now, I guess before we wrap up here too, I wanted to ask you about what gemology is, because I'm not too familiar with gemology, but what is it?
So gemology, it's just the study of gemstones, and so that typically looks like going out and either discovering new gems, minerals, or evaluating ones that have already been cut in jewelry, or ready for jewelry, because there's very specific ways to test different materials where you observe how they interact with light and different unique features they have.
And how does that relate to humans' experiences and psychological experiences? That's the interesting part to me.
Yeah, so to me, I see it as a great metaphor for like our own development. I see us almost as vehicles for consciousness, right? And I see gemstones as vehicles for light, where they, and gemstones in particular are crystals, which is like perfectly repeating ordered matter. And the result is that they're transparent. They let light through, it fills them up completely, they transform it, and they reflect it back out in beautiful and unique patterns. And so I think as we learn to hold more of our wholeness, more of our light, become more coherent, it's similar to that. Like we become more able to hold more consciousness, to increase our awareness, to transform consciousness itself, or the what we put back out into the world, similar to a gem. And so I think there's a lot of things we can learn even in the process of how they're formed under extreme conditions of pressure and heat and stuff, similar to how like character is built under challenges and different pressures and things like that. I think so I see a lot of parallels in that.
I've been even seeing people push back on that now too, where they say, I proposed once, for example, that even with the harmful things narcissists might say to people, that if you look at it through the right lens, you can still find a way for it to help you. Not to say it's acceptable they're doing those things or saying those things or whatever, but I choose to believe there's something to learn and an opportunity in everything. And so I'd said, yeah, if there's something that really bothers you, it's a chance to examine that. Why does it bother you? Is there something that you can work on? But the very fact that I said that, they got very upset. And they said, no, a narcissistic person, I will never change because of a narcissistic person. And I thought to myself, you're kind of missing the point here with what I'm saying. It has nothing to do with this other person. They just happen to be the person who said it. You're not doing this for them or because of them. You're doing this for you as a way just to try to make the best of situations and become the best version of yourself. Why wouldn't you want to do that? But there is a lot of pushback on some of this stuff, especially when it comes to looking at your own side of things, looking at, okay, how can I improve? How can I do better? There seems to be a lot of people that have resistance to that.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's uncomfortable. Like, turning inward, evaluating ourselves, like, all of us, like, we're not immune to having, cognitive distortions and inconsistencies in who we think we are and who we say we are and what we actually do. Like, it's normal. It's part of just being human. And so that can be uncomfortable, but it's also something that when we push through, leads to so much more. And it's where our true power and agency lies, because at the end of the day, we can't change anybody. Like, we can't, like, you cannot make somebody do something. Maybe at gunpoint, right? But like, we're not, like, literally, you cannot make someone change their character. You cannot make someone change their values. That has to only can come from within them. So what you can change is only yourself as well, and your responses to it. So it's not actually giving them anything or changing for them. It's reclaiming your power. It's reclaiming, like, you know what? They did that. That I didn't deserve that. That wasn't like my fault or my doing, maybe even. But I'm going to take my power back. And instead of letting that then define me for the rest of my life, or like prevent me from ever trusting someone again and experiencing true relationship, I'm going to choose to, like, build my resilience. I'm going to choose to build my awareness. I'm going to choose to use this experience to become stronger, to make different choices, to take the risk of trusting again, things like that. And that's a way, to me, of actually reclaiming our power.
Yeah, I love that. Now, after someone has listened to our whole conversation here, we talked about the exploitation in the system, how it rewards predators, and maybe they're thinking, well, Anthony, what do I do? What can I do about this? Where do I start? What do you say to someone who is thinking that right now?
Well, I would say, first of all, like, you don't have to we don't have to fix this all at once, right? This is a much larger issue with a lot of different parts. And so remembering what we do have power over and control over, and that even though this is the larger pattern, it's not everywhere. There's still things within it that function differently. And but even a large system is just made up of individuals making choices. So if we start to make different choices, if we start to see things more clearly, and we continue to spread awareness and increase awareness, that will spread throughout the system. Like, that is the system. It's a bunch of people individually making different choices. And so that's where our power lies. And that's where we can focus. And that's the best place to focus. What am I doing in my immediate actions, words, of my own beliefs, and how I interact daily? Because that's where our power lies.
Awesome. I think that is a good place to end it here. But where can people find more of you if they would like to check out more of your work?
Absolutely. On Threads, on the Inspirited Insight profile I have there, I also have a Substack, under the same name, and I have a lot more writing on these topics, including the gemstones, on there as well.
All right, right on. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today, Anthony. I think you shared a lot of great stuff that I think and I hope people will take to heart and maybe start thinking about that when they start making each individual choice.
Thank you so much for having me today.
All right, my pleasure.